All right, welcome. Let's wait for some people to start actually joining, and then we'll get started. All right, so we'll get going now. Welcome to the fifth webinar in this series, second one hosted by me, Liam Farley, and also my pet sheep on my head because I didn't manage to get a haircut before going into lockdown New Zealand, so it's getting longer and longer. I'll probably look like Cousin It for the next webinar. But we're not talking about assessing my hairstyle, we're talking about assessing an LT and grading an LT. And want to set the expectations before we get started around how LT handles assessments and grading, because even though you can do assessments and grading in LT, it's not been designed as a specific exam tool. So bear that in mind as we go through all this. But having said that, people have done exams successfully in LT and are planning to do exams successfully in LT. So as you probably guessed, talking more about summative assessments and grading, but we'll also be touching upon assessments in general, so that will include formative assessments. All right, so just some housekeeping as well for the webinar. I want to introduce those that are behind the scenes. So we've got Brandon Calderon, Sam Payton, who are product managers, and then Ariana Boulay, who is the CSM for North America and has hosted previous webinars. And in terms of interacting with the webinar, if you're attending live, then we have the chat function. So we can see that, hi Donna. And the chat functions for introducing yourselves, but we've also got the Q&A section. So if you have any questions that pop into mind, please use the Q&A section for answering that. And I will be stopping regularly throughout the webinar to check on the Q&As, and we'll try and answer some live. But very likely we might not be able to answer all of them in time, or maybe they're a bit niggly to show live. So that's where I'm going to be encouraging the LT community again. So that's a really good place to be meeting up with other LT users online. So you can be posting questions, sharing resources, and hopefully being inspired and getting some new ideas on how to best use LT. All right, so going to jump straight into this lesson here because obviously if you're doing assessments, you're going to be doing a lot of question creation. And in terms of trying to not reinvent the wheel or maybe invent a nicer looking wheel, then I highly recommend looking at the extensive collection that ADI has developed of LT content. And so this is just a lesson that's showing how you can go about creating questions in LT. So even if the content might not be overly relevant, you still get some ideas, hopefully, of how you can structure the questions that you're using in your assessments. So for example, you can have a kind of alignment style question using drag and drop. You can have actual label questions if need be, and the classic MCQ, which I imagine is probably the staple for most of you. And then there's also short answer questions. And if you're wondering as well how to go about questioning an LT for MCQs, we want students to select multiple options that are correct, then recommend using the categories question because you can essentially achieve the same thing with categories. So you could have maybe true or false, or in this case, 3 different categories that students can be dragging this answers into. There's also the annotate question, which is a question that's not going to be auto graded. So that's something to keep in mind as well if you are creating questions in LT, to consider the end result of marking, which hopefully doesn't cause you too much stress or hair loss, because there are questions that are automatically or can automatically be graded in LT. The annotate question is an example of one that would require manual grading because it requires a grader's subjective interpretation of what the answer is going to be. So yeah, just something to keep in mind when you are actually developing your assessments with the questions that you are going to be creating. Obviously, there's always the payoff of the lower and higher level of blooms, because with open-ended questions and annotated style questions, you can be reaching those kind of more analysis and higher level ones compared to MCQs. Though saying that, there are ways that you can word MCQs, but that's a whole nother talk, so won't want to burrow down that rabbit hole. In terms of questions as well in LT, tables are really good. You can often combine many questions into one table question. And yeah, so this is a simple example here. And trying to take advantage of LT's ability to have example data, you could actually have more practical based questions as well in your assessments. So you could be using the data panels and having students derive values from that, and then putting those into a table, potentially even having to input a function, and then you could have a open text question after that table. So that could be quite a gnarly question, but it could really burrow down into the student's understanding of data and what that data is specifically showing. So that's a very brief overview and quick overview of some of the question styles that you can be having in LT when you are looking to create assessments. In terms of if you're frantically needing to get content up and running and you do happen to be in the life science realm, we do have a lot of health science related content, and these can be freely accessed. So I'm just going to jump over to another lesson, which is showing one of the pre-lab prep lessons that are available in the ADI's LT collection, so in this case the human physiology collection. And I'm pointing out the pre-lab preparation lessons because they are essentially, I'm not sure if I want to use the term question bank, but a very mini question bank. So a single page of different types of questions and relating to a particular theme. So if you are looking for inspiration on question types and potentially even using some of these questions, you can look at the pre-lab prep lessons in the ADI collections and then just copy and paste those panels into the assessment that you're creating. I won't go into the authoring side of that. That was covered in the last webinar, and also on our LT support site, there's quite a lot of resources about how to be shifting content between lessons. But just pointing out that the pre-lab prep lessons are a good source if you are wanting to quickly grab some content and maybe just rejig maybe the order of questions or the content. And just glancing across to make sure that not being told to go slower, so looking all good. And also one last thing on different types of questions that you could be using outside of the pre-lab prep questions. We do also have the tutorial-based questions or tutorial lessons that have questions that you can take as well. Might require a bit more hunting around in the lesson, but they are also a good source of questions. So yeah, and obviously if you're not used LT before, or you don't want to be going through all the content that we have because you've already got existing content and you want to be bringing that content into LT, again, you can do that pretty simply with LT. So I will show that quickly now, even though it was covered in the previous webinar. And so I've got a lesson that I've started creating here for assessments, and I'm just going to try and remember the hotkey for. I was trying to be fancy with hotkeys, forgot them, so we'll do it the old manual way. Cool. So if you've got a lovely Word document or PDF of questions, then you can actually be bringing those directly into LT with the fast drag feature. So you can just get the question and literally drag it across. But importantly, make sure to hover over the cog icon before you release your mouse, because that will bring up the options to choose what panel type you want. So in this case, just want a simple text question, and there you go. So now you've got the text question in there, and you just need to double click in to change the assessment type. So obviously if you're creating an assessment, you want to be able to actually indicate to LT that it is to be graded. And so in this case, we'll change it to be graded. Just to clarify the difference between these three. So instant feedback means that it's not going to be tagged in LT's grading interface. And yeah, you have to go another way to grade that. And it allows students to check their answers straight away. Graded is the classic one if you're doing formative assessments. So if I select that, you'll see that a mark has appeared at the top. And difference between graded and instant plus graded is that instant plus graded allows students to still check their answers. So I'm going to stay with graded and set the answer just to show that there are two different areas that you can fill out. The top one here that's already got the cursor showing is where you put the model answer. So because the question has been set to graded, students won't see the model answer. This is more for the graders. Just if you're up at 2 AM in the morning and you forget the answer, you can quickly check the model answer. Down the bottom here, there's the grading instructors, instructors grading area. So that's where you're putting in not so much rubrics, but just talking around maybe if there's a potential range or those more subjective questions that graders might need help for, particularly if you're lucky enough to have a couple of TAs that are helping grading, but maybe need a bit of a hand. And you can change the points as well awarded to a question. On that note, if you are using label questions or drag and drop questions, it's a good idea to figure out how many areas you are labeling and then set that to be the points, because if you leave it as the default 1, I'm pretty sure it will give you a fraction of the overall marks. So if you had 5 options, it'd be 0.2. So that might be a bit annoying when you're tallying up grades. So just keep in mind, the amount of points that you're doing and the number of options you have for labeling questions. So as soon as you click done, you can, as always, preview to see what it looks like from a student's perspective. You can see that even if a student put in a very well thought out answer like that, there is no option for them to check the answer. And just on the drag and drop again, just highlighting that you can do this for cells as well. So making sure that you're actually in edit mode, non-preview mode, and then you can create table questions. So hopefully that's enough to show that even if you do have a assessment that's not yet an LT, it's very easy to bring those questions across. Cool, just making sure I'm not forgetting anything. So I might actually open it up now or check the questions and answers, but actually before I do that, there was something I was meant to do right at the start, which is launch a poll, just to get an idea of those that are watching this live, where you're sitting at with assessments and grading. So bear with me while I launch the poll. So soon you'll see a poll appear, and please just choose those that are relevant to you. So here we go. Cool. All right. And the poll's now live. Give you guys a couple of minutes to read through those. Please let me know if you can't see the poll as well. It's always so exciting seeing the polls come in live. All right, so while the poll's coming in, I've got a question from Judith, which I'll attempt to answer live. So Judith said, can we set up questions so that the little points thing doesn't show? The use case would be to do auto grading on a formative lesson without having the students see that the questions are being marked, and not have a staff person have to go through all the questions and mark them. Oh, all right, so in terms of points showing, so that is a default feature if you have selected the grading or instant graded. So you could have maybe instant feedback and potentially use, now I'm thinking off the top of my head now, how to go about this, showing those questions in the grading interface of LT that haven't yet been or haven't been assigned as a graded question. So it might be something that'll become more apparent later in the webinar, Judith, but we can follow up later with this, or it could also just be a feature request. All right, and so also we've got one from Georgina. Hi, Georgina. So when you drag across from Excel, does it bring any formulas? Glad you asked that. Yes, it does. So you just need to make sure that the formulas are actually showing. So very quickly, so we go. All right. So you just have to make sure that you show the formulas, and then when you drag it in, making sure to exit out, those formulas should stay in as well. So there we go. So we can see the formulas already populated. So yes, you can use formulas. All right. Might leave the questions there and check out the poll just to see where everyone is sitting. So bit of a spread, pretty even spread actually. Yeah, so it seems most people are actually considering or planning to run an exam in LT, which makes sense if you're attending this webinar, and actually got quite a few that have already run exams. So that's awesome to hear. And again, just pointing out that the LT community is there. So if you're wanting to pick the brains of those that have run exams or in a similar boat of wanting to run exams and maybe the best approach to do that, definitely recommend going on LT community to discuss those. In terms of how people have, or currently running exams, so poor trees, paper still seems to be the main one with 71%. If you're still running exams on paper, and 60% in LMS, and quite a few face-to-face as well, which I imagine, and given the COVID era, is proving a bit difficult to do. So thankful for Zoom in that case, and some in LT, and we've even got some people that shout their exams or their questions at students. I'm not sure how you would convert that into LT, run after them with a laptop maybe showing LT. All right, so close that down and get back on into it. So bear with me while I get back on schedule. All right, so I have covered questions and creating those in LT, but now thinking on a bit of a higher level in terms of how to structure lessons and the course. So in terms of structuring the lessons, it's a bit difficult to try and think of all the contexts that each of you watching are currently in, but off the top of my head, that the very first one that I'd recommend is a introduction or more instructional page. And just this morning, I did actually create a template lesson of an LT lesson that you could be using for running formative assessments, and I'll be putting that on the LT community soon. Not sounding like a broken record talking about the LT community, but I think it'll be a great place for continued discussions around this. But in terms of instructions, I would be very clearly stating to students what is expected of them during the exam, because there's going to be quite a few different ways that you go about it, and ideally, even if you could be having test exams, so say, or like mock exams released to students prior. So if you have your simple templates that you've created in LT, that if you are able to release that to students with obviously a clear warning that they're not being assessed, but it's just to help them understand how the actual exam process will happen in LT. So that means they're coming in with a bit more of an understanding. Obviously, that's the ideal world, and you might not be able to get all students doing that, but I think it's probably worth a try. And yeah, so in terms of the instruction page, one thing to probably make clear is, yeah, any kind of invigilation instructions, which some people I know have opted to not actually invigilate the lessons, just going for open book. And that's where I guess the authoring of the questions becomes even more important, because you would want to create questions that are on the high level of Bloom's, so it's not easily Googleable by the students. But if you are going down the more traditional route of having students be invigilated, whether that's maybe with some third-party tool like ProctorU or Examify, then yeah, you probably want to specifically outline what students can and can't do. If you are examining in, say, a lab class, and so you can actually see the content of students, what's on student screen, that makes it a bit easier. And a very simple tip is you can press F11 and it makes the screen go full, so it gives it a bit more of a locked in vibe. So yeah, that's a simple tip. And the other key thing to remember with setting up the actual lessons themselves, that there are commit pages and checkpoint pages. Sorry, completion pages and checkpoint pages. So if you're not familiar with those, I'll show you what a checkpoint page looks like. So when you insert a checkpoint page, what it'll do is it'll add a page after the one you were just on. And so as a student, when they come to that page, they have to click commit to proceed to the next page. And by doing that, that will lock all the answers previous to that checkpoint page. Making sure that students are fully aware and understand what this page means is something that probably want to be detailing on that instruction page at the start. And also I would recommend just to make sure having some very obvious signage before that commit page. You know, you are done with this page, move to the next, or something along those lines. And you can change the style to make this very obvious to students, just to help those who've got frantic exam minds, yeah, not do anything a bit silly, because with the checkpoint pages, it's something that can't be undone, even by an educator. So while you can uncommit a lesson that a student has committed, if it has been a checkpoint has been committed, then yeah, that is locked in. So making it very clear that if you are going to be using checkpoints, that yeah, you signpost it very well to students. Or you cannot use checkpoints, and I know there's arguments for and against, and you guessed it, LT community is probably a good place to be discussing that. So there's a bit going on in chat here, so I'm just going to double check that there's nothing that, all right. So looking all right, quite a few questions coming in, so I'll get to those soon, but I just want to point out the other page that's almost essential to have if you are creating an assessment in LT, and that's a report page. So to show how to create that, I'm just going to delete the one that I created before to show you the workflow. So at the end of a lesson, when you click create completion page, what you'll see is a report page will be made. And the way that this works, if you're not familiar with report pages, is it will alias all questions that are in that lesson. You can choose to remove these from the report if you want, and you can even remove the report entirely. So again, depends on your context. Sometimes it could be useful, I guess, for students maybe to go through the entire report afterwards as a way to make sure that they have answered all the questions before committing. Or if you don't want students to see that, you can toggle that off. And what you're left with is an area to write instructions. And so again, just making it very clear and explicit to students what happens when they click yeah, a certain button. So yeah, in terms of what you see in terms of view and commit, that is something that is set at the course level. So going to jump out quickly, but seeing that there's 8 open questions now, I might just, 9 now, have a look at some of the questions quickly. So first one from Kristen. Hey, Kristen. So is there a way to get the MCQ answers list answers and categories to fit into separate answers versus all going into one line and then needing to cut and paste them individually? So I assume from that you want to be able to drag in an entire MCQ and have the options auto-populate as the options in LT. At the moment, it still is going to be a manual process of cutting and pasting those options into the options on the MCQ panel in LT, and same with categories. So when you're fast dragging from outside of LT, the text that you drag in will only ever be in the STEM area of the question. So, thanks, Judith, for pointing out that there's some questions in the chat. Just point out that if you do have any questions, to use the question and answer feature, not the chat. So cheers. Cool. From Ian, in Canvas you can set the exam to be a fixed length, e.g. an hour. Can you do this in LT? Perfect timing. I'm actually going to be showing the course settings and availability for what you can do in terms of setting when the exam is actually going to be. So Ian, I'll answer that live soon. Kristen again, will the checkpoints go back to notifying the students that they have missed questions? So that is a recent change that some of you might have noticed, that previously in LT, if students had missed questions, there was a notification saying you missed X number of questions. That was causing a bit of confusion in some cases, and so temporarily we've removed that feature. So Sam, our product manager, might be able to answer that more in depth, but off the top of my head, so I can't say, sorry. Terry, hey Terry, and, oh, sorry, I missed something there. Checkpoint pages not to be uncommitted. Yes, so to clarify, if a student clicks commit on a checkpoint page, those can't be uncommitted. So yeah, just want to make sure that students are really aware of when they go through and click commit. Yeah, that's it. All right, and Magda, is there a way to include model answers in the reports? So in terms of students being able to see the model answers, yeah, and not at the moment. So the answers that are displayed in the report, and just to go back to that particular context. So in terms of what's seen on a report, it will only be the students' answers. There have been some requests about toggling on showing the model answers, but in terms of if it's from an educator or grader's perspective, there are ways to go about this, and in the grading interface as well, you will be able to see the model answers, but from students' perspective, at the moment, they will only see the model, the answers they put in, not the model answers. And last one, Terry, I missed how you got a report page. All right, I'll just quickly show that again. Bearing in mind the time. All right, so to create a report page, no matter what page you're on, you can do this. It's just under pages and then create completion page. So a bit of change in the terms used. So when you create a report page, you're actually creating a completion page. So as easy as that. Cool. Okay, so getting back to setting up the course and answering your question, Ian, about availability. So once you've got your lovely assessment created, then you can, I'm just going to use the template one without actually showing you in it, you'll need to publish that, that lesson. But one thing to keep in mind before you do this is looking at the report settings. And so This is a setting for the entire course, and it's determining what functionality students will see when they're on a report page. This is actually something that, again, has changed quite recently. The development team has merged the two previous grading workflows. So for those of you that have been using LT before, you hopefully know that there was Coda Cloud grading and PDF grading. Now they'll be merged together. So what you have is the option to allow students to download a PDF of the report, which if you're doing a formative assessment is probably not something that you want to have. But something you might want to have, though, is the ability for students to email their assessments to a particular email address. Keeping in mind that it can only be one recipient, so potentially having a generic email that many people have access to could be a good way to go about it. And this would be if you're wanting to grade in a bit more of a traditional manual approach of printing out PDFs maybe and just going through by hand and marking, or if you're needing to maybe do some kind of go through an audit process, or potentially if you're wanting to use anti-plagiarism, that could be an option as well, that you could have the PDFs and run those through Turnitin. Not familiar with Turnitin though, so that's starting to get a bit grey area, sorry. All right, and in terms of setting availability, so coming back up to lesson and finding the assessment that you created, going publish, and you'll see that there's two options. Imagine you're not working right up to the deadline where you would make it straight available to students who are eagerly awaiting to be assessed. So you're probably going to be setting the availability in advance. And it happened very quickly, so I just want to point out what happened when I clicked set availability. It actually took you from the lessons card into the student work card, and you're burrowing down now and looking at the lesson or the assessment lesson, and you're looking at availability. And if you have set up sections, then you have the option to set the availability by section. And sections is something that could actually be quite advantageous if you are doing assessments in LT, because again, trying to think of all the different scenarios, but if you have content in LT that you don't want students to be able to access during the exam period, then you could potentially shift all the students into a section for that time and then out of it. Obviously, you want to explore that a bit further and do a bit of testing. And if you have a elaborate setup of sections, that could be a bit tricky, potentially requiring a bit more manual work to undo that action. But if you don't have many sections or you haven't used sections before, then being able to shift students between sections allows you to very quickly have students see and not see content. So in terms of setting the availability for a particular section, it's just under the set availability option. So you just need to find the date that you're actually going to be running the exam, choose the time, and then importantly, adding a commit time. So by default, that's a week after. So make sure that if you are setting commit time to change the date as well. So it's not the same day, it's a week after. So you don't want to leave the exam open for a week and then choosing whatever time it is. So I think you said an hour, so we'll change it to an hour, and have to change it to PM probably, or no, you get the idea. And then once you've done that, you'll see when it's going to become available and for how long and in your particular time zone. If you do have numerous sections, you'll have to do that for each section. So that's how you can set the availability of just that assessment. So a lot of information thrown there, so I assume there's a few questions and maybe some stuff on chat. So we've got some more questions coming in. Another one from Kristen. Is there a way to change the model answer once you are grading the exam so that you can alter the model answers based on student behavior? That's a tricky one. You always ask the gnarly questions there, Kristen. So you you can always change content in LT at any time. It's whether students will see that if you update that lesson. So yeah, I might come back to that one or answer it afterwards. Sorry, Kristen. Can a report PDF be sent to a URL? Ooh. I don't think so. You'd probably need to have some sort of redirect, Judith, from the email address to a URL. So yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe that's something we can follow up afterwards as well. Terry asking, can you uncommit an assessment for a section all at once? The same way that you can commit a section all at once. Yes, so in terms of doing bulk, uncommit. So if I jump out into another instance, which has some pre-populated ones. So if you go to the availability for that assessment lesson and you see the sections, I'm not going to do it now because I don't want to wipe options here, but you can make available now, and that will, that will essentially uncommit it for all the students. But by doing that, you will see that it will clear the grades and feedback as well. So keep in mind that, for whatever reason, if you want to bulk uncommit by making the lesson available again, it will clear any grading. So I'm not going to do that in this case. And any plans to add the capability to randomize questions and answers? Thank you for reminding me the next step to discuss, which is that at the moment there is no kind of question bank randomized pool that you can draw from in LT. Again, just coming back to that point they made at the start, that LT hasn't been specifically designed for exams. So the way that you can go about that though is a bit more of a manual process. So say you had your lesson created and that was the master lesson, but you have maybe like a deferred cohort of students or those students that maybe have accessibility issues and so they need extra time, then this is where you can use the duplicate function in LT. So you can duplicate your master lesson and then rename it accordingly. So I'll just call it deferred. And now it's two separate lessons. At the moment, they're exactly the same, but you can open up that one that you've I'll show that one just yet. Don't want to give it away. Assuming this is the one that we copied, you can go in and just rejig the order of the lesson or order of the questions. You could be changing the content, and so maybe that's something to think about when you're authoring the questions. Are there question types that you can be creating where it's very easy to change a couple of variables and it's a completely different question that students would really struggle to share answers with. So that's where table questions probably come in quite well, because with a couple of changes to variables, you have a completely new question and it only took maybe 30 seconds or so. But it still requires manually coming in and shifting the questions around and then publishing that. So that's, again, we're having the sections in LT becomes useful because you can make two lessons. So one lesson that's for the standard cohort and one for the deferred cohort of students, and you can have them in separate sections and you can make the lesson available, their respective lessons available to each of those sections. Cool. And Terry again, if you update, don't you have to reset student progress, which deletes the answers? So in terms of updating a published lesson, so that's correct. If you want the students who have already started the lesson to see any changes you have made, you will need to reset their progress, which is irreversible, and so something you want to really make sure that is necessary. So yes, it will delete all the answers when you reset the student progress. when you update. So make available now is, yeah, same as uncommit. In effect, yeah, that's that's kind of what you're doing. So there isn't a uncommit under student work. Sorry, jumping around a wee bit now. So if you look at student progress, don't worry, these are ADI staff, I can show their details. Yeah, there isn't the option to uncommit bulk numbers of students. It's individual students at the moment, and if they have been, if they have done an assessed question, assessed lesson, the option is to grant an extension. And if you are granting extensions in LT, keep in mind that there isn't a option yet to close down that extension, so it will run indefinitely. So you have to make a note to come back and commit that student again. All right, so looking at the time, I want to make sure I actually show the grading side of LT, and funny enough, already here. So if you are wanting to grade an LT, and I'll just actually go back to show you again how to get here, or get there. It's under student work, finding the lesson that you're wanting to grade, and then click on grading. And you'll have a brief overview to see how many students have actually committed into an extension. And assuming that that's all hunky-dory, then you can hit grade lesson. And I should point out that the development team are working on improvements in this area. So what you see now very likely will be changing. Don't know the exact dates, but probably in the next month, there'll be some cool new improvements. And just going to, once again, give a bit of a plug to the LT community and actually jump across into it to show that Mark, one of the designers on our development team, has actually given a sneak preview of what's coming up for the grading improvements. So if you want to know what's coming up, I definitely recommend jumping in the LT community and going to the How Can We Improve LT section and having a look at what Mark's put up, because you can give your feedback as well. So if there's some real pain points, that's where you can voice them. All right, so jumping back into the grading interface now. And what you'll see is it's a large matrix with all the student names on the left, and you can filter down by section. So again, another use for having sections, and it can be useful if you're, say, assigning different sections to different graders, then they can just be focusing on those particular sections. And pointing out that that any auto-graded question will be indicated by a lightning bolt. If for some reason you want to override that, the answer that's been put in automatically, say for example you realize you had made a mistake and you now have to award all students 0 or 1, you can click on that lightning bolt and go manually grade question. It does mean you have to manually grade all those questions, so bear that in mind. All right, and if you want, you can toggle those off to be left with those open-ended questions. And how to go about actually doing the grading is find what student and what question you want to grade and just click on that. And you'll be taken into this view where you can see the student's answer, the model answer that you created when authoring the question, and the grading instructions as well that you also put in. So you can click into the grade option and give an answer or give a mark, and you can also give feedback. If you've made these questions graded, it's probably not too much point maybe giving feedback, but yeah. So you can also just go through all the questions for that particular student. Now that is something that is going to be changed with the upcoming improvements, is that instead of going through all the questions for that one student, you'll be able to go through all the students for that one question, which is usually the way that I think people grade. So that's a cool improvement, hope coming up. So working through the same process as going through, giving grades and feedback if you want, until you get to the end for that particular student, and you can see the overall grade, which if you need can be adjusted, and you can give overall feedback to that student. And then when you hit right again, you just drop down to the next student and work your way through until eventually you've graded all the students and had a well-deserved glass of wine. So if you manage to forget to add a question or assign a question when authoring to be graded, there's a new feature that allows you to toggle on those questions that weren't assigned as graded when you're authoring. In this case, there's only one that pops up, but it does allow you to come in and grade that. You'll notice that there aren't model answers or grading instructions because that question didn't have those assigned with it because it wasn't assigned as a graded question, but it still allows you to give a mark and any feedback. So kind of a bit of a safety net, so to say, if you do miss assigning a question as graded. Oh, all right, so looking at some questions now. Kristen again, can you still grade after you have unpublished the lesson? So no, the lesson has to be published in order to grade. So that's, sometimes we're a bit of working with moving students around sections. So you can be grading a lesson that isn't visible to students as required, and it does depend on how you've set up the course, because if I jump back out, you'll see that students can still see this lesson, which might not be ideal, having students still be able to see a lesson after the exam period. So as Kristen was saying, you could unpublish, but that will remove all these options here. So that's where shifting students between sections, so moving them to a section that doesn't have that availability set, is useful. So considering that before you start grading, because you can move things around before you start grading and then start grading. But if you have started grading and then try and do that, you might lose some of your grading. Oh, and I know, sorry Terry, I've confused you. So Terry asked about non-assessed questions. If you write a question that is not multiple choice, how do I make it assessed? Or better put, are all open-ended questions non-assessed? Okay, sorry, it's to clarify with the non-assessed, Terry. So by that I mean if a question when you're authoring, and I'm just going to open up this lesson again. So when you're authoring, if you haven't assigned a question to be graded or made a question graded, that won't appear in the grading interface. So if you haven't selected graded or instant plus graded, then you won't see that question appear in the grading interface. But thankfully there is an option to toggle on show non-assessed questions, and that will show those questions that you did forget to add or make graded, and so those appear here. So all right, and Kristen, so would you be able to see the student feedback you wrote for an instant feedback question in the grading section for ungraded questions? No, I don't think so. It's a good question. I've never actually tried it, but yeah, if you have set a model answer, that's something I'm gonna have to try. I might not try live now, but yeah, I'll get back to you on that one, Kristen, because potentially maybe you can. This is a new feature that it's only come out a couple of weeks ago, so I haven't explored avenues of it, sorry. But yeah, we'll get back to you on that one, Kristen. That's a cool question. Yeah, so Terry, hopefully that answers your question, distinguishing between non-assessed and assessed questions. And yeah, all open-ended questions must be non-assessed. No, so all open-ended questions, you have the option to choose them to be assessed or not. If you forget to assess them or have them as assessable questions, then you can still see those under non-assessed. But going right back to basics, if you're creating an assessment lesson in LT, by default, have it as graded, and then it'll appear in the grading interface. So realize now it's 50 minutes into the webinar, and imagine you potentially have some exams that you need to be writing or marking, and there are no more questions, and I don't see anything on the chat. So I might start wrapping that up there, and make sure that I've not forgotten anything. So in terms of getting the grades out of LT, there's a couple of ways you can go about it. If you have integrated with your LMS, so that's either Canvas, Blackboard, or Moodle, you can be syncing your grades into the gradebook from that particular course in LT to the synced course in your LMS. There's also the option to export the grades as a CSV. So, sorry, too many different tabs open. But yeah, if you have finished grading, then you can export the grades as a CSV file, and then you can be importing that into your LMS or wherever the grades are needing to be stored. And also pointing out that there is the option to show the students their grades or not in LT just by this option here. There was a lot covered today, so pointing out that a lot of what was talked about is already detailed on our support site, which can be accessed directly from LT, and you can either type in the relevant search term or look for the grading in LT option here. But again, this is likely to change with the cool improvements that will be coming out in the next month. Oh, and as I was saying that, a couple more questions come in. So we've got a few more minutes, so I'll try and answer those now. All right, so Terry again. I've come across questions in grading such as on pop-up pages that don't show the students but show in the gradebook, such as conversions of grams to micronewtons. Yeah, so there can be panels in LT that are graded, so data panels yeah, can actually be shown as or come up in yeah, the grading interface. For some reason they've been accidentally toggled on to graded, and that was actually part of the confusion as to why checkpoint pages no longer show if there are unanswered questions, because sometimes there were questions such as Terry's pointed out where students were needing to do a simple conversion and that was leading to confusion for the students. Fernanda, is there a word limit for open-ended questions? Oh, that's a very good question, and I don't know off the top of my head, but we'll make sure to get back to you with that one, Fernanda. All right. So Terry, I might follow up with you afterwards, or someone follow up with you afterwards about those questions with pop-ups. Cool. So once again, just another plug for the LT community, which if you are already a member, can be accessed from the LT community drop down here. Or actually, if you aren't a member as well, because if you're not yet a member, then you can be yeah, creating your own account when you go to this link. But if you are a member and signed in, what will happen, as I just showed, is you'll be directed straight away to the community where you can be posting some of these questions and trying to reach out to those that either have the answers, hopefully, or resources that they're willing to share, or are just in the same boat as you and trying to figure that out. And ADI staff are in the community, so we'll also be able to jump in and help out if need be. But yeah, on that note, I'll end it there. We're not being able to see anyone, but I'll wave anyway. Thanks for joining, and yeah, if you're wanting to watch a recording of this, we hopefully will have it up early next week. All right, cheers. Thanks, guys.